When a young black housemaid whispered her feelings to the wealthy, white man she worked for, the world around them froze. She expected rejection, maybe even humiliation. But what came next shattered every assumption about class, color, and love. In a mansion where she was invisible, her confession exposed more than emotion. It uncovered a truth about privilege, humanity, and the quiet courage of a woman who dared to love someone she was never supposed to. And by the time the truth came out, not just one life changed, but an entire household was forced to see differently. Ava Johnson had always known her place. Every morning, she arrived before dawn at the Kensington estate, a sprawling white mansion owned by Charles Kensington, a respected businessman. Ava was quiet, diligent, and unseen. She cleaned, cooked, polished silver until her hands ached. Charles, in his 40s, was everything she wasn't: wealthy, educated, powerful. Yet he carried loneliness like a shadow. His wife had passed away years earlier, leaving the mansion silent and cold. Ava had been working there for 3 years, always invisible, or so she thought. But in her stillness, Charles began to notice her. The grace in her silence, the sincerity in her work, and the kindness in her eyes. One evening, while dusting the study, Ava found an old photograph of Charles and his late wife. She smiled softly, then caught her reflection in the glass. She knew she shouldn't feel what she did. A poor black maid falling for a rich white widower? It was absurd. Society would laugh. The world would judge. But love doesn't always ask permission. It simply grows in the quiet spaces where respect and kindness meet. And one fateful night, when the storm raged outside and truth pressed too hard against her heart, Ava whispered the words that would change everything. That night, thunder shook the sky. Ava stood at the door, holding Charles's dinner tray. He was reading by the fireplace, looking lost in memory. She hesitated, her hands trembling. She had promised herself she'd stay silent. But her heart refused. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. Though there were no witnesses, the words carried the weight of centuries, a servant confessing love to her master. Charles stared at her, stunned. She braced for anger, for laughter, for dismissal. But he said nothing. He only stood, walked to the window, and breathed deeply. The next morning, everything felt colder. Ava feared she'd lose her job. The staff whispered. Somehow they knew. The mansion's gossip spread like wildfire. Some mocked her courage. Others pitied her foolishness. Days passed in silence. Charles avoided her. But while Ava suffered shame, something inside Charles began to shift. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. They weren't desperate. They were honest, brave. He remembered how she once stayed up all night tending to his sick dog, how she protected his property during a blackout, how she never once complained despite long hours and low pay. He began to see her not as a maid, but as a person, one who saw him for who he truly was, not his wealth or name. Still, society's shadow loomed. How could he care for her without facing ridicule from friends, family, and press? A white man of reputation falling for a black servant. It would ruin him. Yet every time he looked at her, that fear felt smaller. The breaking point came when Charles overheard 2 guests mocking Ava, calling her the girl who forgot her place. Something in him snapped. For the first time in years, he raised his voice, not in anger at her, but in defense of her dignity. That was the moment the world around him began to change. The next evening, Charles gathered everyone, staff and guests, in the grand hall. Ava stood at the back, nervous, clutching her apron. She thought she was about to be dismissed. Charles stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with fire. "I've heard what's been said about Ava," he began. "That she's foolish, that she's forgotten her place. But perhaps it's all of us who have forgotten ours. As human beings." Murmurs rippled through the room. He turned to Ava. "You showed me more honesty and courage than anyone else in this house. You saw me as a man, not a title. And for that, I owe you more than you'll ever know." The silence was deafening. Then, in front of them all, Charles offered his hand. "You're not fired, Ava. You're the reason this house feels alive again." Gasps filled the hall. Some servants wept. The guests looked away, ashamed. From that moment on, Ava was no longer invisible. Charles's decision shocked his social circle, but he stood by it. The newspapers whispered. Society frowned. Yet for the first time, Charles felt free. And Ava, for the first time, felt seen. Their connection wasn't built on power or pity, but on two wounded souls finding peace in each other's presence. The confession that once threatened to destroy everything had instead revealed what truly mattered: humanity beyond the walls of class and color. Months later, the Kensington estate was no longer filled with silence. Laughter echoed again. Charles promoted Ava to house manager, not out of affection, but respect. She oversaw the staff with fairness and dignity. One spring morning, while tending to the garden, Ava looked up to see Charles watching her from the balcony. Their eyes met. No words, just mutual understanding. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, but something deeper. A bond built on truth. Over time, people's whispers faded. What remained was the quiet legacy of two people who defied expectations, not through rebellion, but compassion. Charles began funding scholarships for young Black women pursuing education. He credited the idea to someone who taught me what courage really looks like. Ava used her new income to support her family and others like her. Their story became a quiet lesson for those who heard it. Not about forbidden love, but about dignity, empathy, and the power of seeing beyond what the world tells us to see. As the years passed, Ava continued working with pride, no longer hidden in the shadows of hierarchy. And one evening, while closing the windows before a summer storm, she whispered to herself, smiling softly, "Love doesn't need permission, only courage." In a world still divided by walls of color and class, her story stands as a question for us all. How many hearts have we ignored because we were too busy seeing differences instead of souls